into emnandi kubaba yabona njengoba we've got this thing now ukuthi we the black people, we are the original race and the melanin is making us do this. Ubaba says the current Bantu, they come from a half-breed Odu who was created from beasts in the field and the original stock of the Amariri.
Throughout the roughly 300,000 years that our species has been on this planet, we have interacted with a handful of other human species. Some really similar, we hybridized with them. Some quite a bit different, and I'm going to tell you all about these interactions in just a couple of minutes. The story starts around 600,000 years ago. Prior to this, there was a really large population that spanned this large region. But now the climate's changing, and what was once habitable is becoming less habitable. So this huge population that's really interconnected becomes fragmented. And when that happens, speciation is able to occur as those smaller pockets continue evolving separately. Our ancestors, the ancestors of sapiens, they're here in Africa. The ancestors of the Neanderthals and Denisovans, who they're throughout this area up here. We meet up with them again later, but first we get to talk about one of the strangest species in the human genus, Homo naledi. You can see in this picture up here, their face was similar in size to ours, but their brain was much smaller. They had really long fingers, good for grasping limbs. They had adaptations with their shoulder that made it seem like they spent a little bit more time in the trees. They're kind of this weird species in our human genus that has a lot of Australopithecine-like traits. And we know that we were living around the same area, so we probably interacted. We don't have any genetic evidence that suggests we interbred with the naledi, but that's still something we could learn about in the future. The next species we interacted with, though, we do know we interbred with them, and that started happening as far back as over 200,000 years ago, as the Neanderthals of Europe and Eurasia would move south, and some sapiens populations would move out of Africa. Now these populations of sapiens, they interbred with the Neanderthals. We can see that in the DNA of later Neanderthals, but they seem to have been dead ends, meaning those populations, they didn't persist, they died out. It wasn't until closer to 60 or 70,000 years ago that populations of sapiens actually had success leaving Africa, and that success led to the populations that we have outside of Africa today. So those later journeys out of Africa, those led to a lot more of these interbreeding events between our species and Neanderthals, eventually leading to the Neanderthals going extinct, no longer existing, being absorbed into our larger population. Next, we have the sister species of the Neanderthals. These are the ones marked green up here, and a lot of these skulls, we don't know for sure whether these are Denisovans. It's hard to prove it without DNA, but we do have some DNA from material up in this region that shows us the Denisovans were there, and we also know through multiple events that our species interbred with these Denisovans. And the populations we interbred with around Southeast Asia, there was a lot of diversity between them. Next, we get to another interesting one, the Hobbit people of Flores. So these people were living on this island, and evidence suggests they may actually have descended from earlier populations of humans like Erectus that left Africa before our species. The current evidence also suggests that they had to have traveled at least a decent distance across water. Whether that was accidental or actually sailing, we don't know for sure. But because they were on this island for hundreds of thousands of years, they actually evolved to be much smaller. We call that insular dwarfism. They seem to have been about 3.5 feet tall with really large feet proportionally. Their story ended shortly after our species arrived on that island. It seems like we outcompeted them. Recent studies tried to see if there was any evidence that we had interbred with them, and they did not find any of that evidence. And then finally, for this video, we have one last small island species, Homo luzonensis. This is from the island of Luzon in the Philippines. We don't know much about this species. We've got some fossils that suggest they were another small species, kind of like Floresiensis. There's some traits that look really archaic, so they seem to not be too closely related to us. But there is another idea that maybe these are related to Denisovans and are like a population of Denisovans that went through this island dwarfism. The jury's still out on that. Now, there were probably other species that we don't know about that were out there as well. There were probably some populations of descendants of Erectus, especially out here in East Asia. But, you know, we've only got what the fossil record shows, and this is kind of the story we know so far as of today.